When I first met my wife, I thought I had finally hit the jackpot. I'm a simple guy. I've been working with my hands since I was old enough to lift a hammer. I don't make a fortune, but I make an honest living. My clothes smell a little like wood and sweat sometimes, but I keep myself neat. I shave, I shower, and I always try to look presentable. At the beginning, she didn't seem to mind at all. In fact, she used to say she loved how hardworking I was. She'd brag to her friend about how handy I was, how I could fix anything around the house, and how I wasn't afraid to get dirty for the sake of putting food on the table. I thought, finally, someone who values me for who I am, not for what I earn or what kind of office I sit in. But even in those early days, there were little cracks I probably should have noticed. Her parents, especially her dad, would make these jokes at family dinners. Stuff like, better wash your hands twice before you sit at the table. You don't want sawdust in the mashed potatoes. Everyone would laugh, and my wife would chuckle too, brushing it off as harmless teasing. At first, I told myself it was no big deal. I'd heard worse on job sites. But deep down, I couldn't shake this feeling that I wasn't being seen as an equal. I just ignored it, thinking that once we were married, they'd get used to me and the jokes would stop. Oh man, if only I knew how wrong I was. Marriage was supposed to be the start of something better, right? That's what I thought, anyway. But it felt like the moment we said, "I do," something changed in her. At first, it was little comments, barely noticeable if you weren't paying attention. I'd come home after a long day, covered in the usual dust and sweat, and she'd wrinkle her nose a bit. "Go shower first before you sit down," she'd say with a laugh. I figured that was normal. Most people don't want dirt on their couch. No big deal. But then the comments started carrying a different edge. We'd be getting ready to go out, and she'd glance at me and sigh. "You're not seriously going like that, are you? You look like you just ran out of a workshop and hid in a crowd." I'd tell her I was dressed fine, clean jeans, a pressed shirt, but she'd just shake her head and mutter something like, "This is why I don't like going places with you." It stung, especially because I've always made an effort to keep myself neat, to blend in, to be sociable. I wasn't showing up anywhere in greasy coveralls. But no matter what I did, it was like she only saw me as the laborer. And the more time went on, the more her parents' jokes started turning into her own words. At dinner, she'd laugh along with them. At home, she'd repeat things like, "Why can't you just get a normal job? All the husbands of my friends work in offices, in shirts and ties." It wasn't just about the work anymore. It was about me. And I had no idea how far she was about to take it. One evening, I finally snapped. I'd just gotten home after a 12-hour shift. My hands were aching, my back was killing me, but I was proud. I'd finished a big project ahead of schedule. I walked in expecting at least a, "Hey, how was your day?" Instead, she looked me up and down and said, "Don't sit there. That's the clean sofa. You'll ruin it with your work clothes." I froze. I had literally showered at work before leaving because I knew she'd complain. I was wearing clean clothes. Yet to her, I was still dirty. I sat down anyway and said, "What's your problem? Why do you keep acting like I'm some kind of walking mess? I keep myself clean. I take care of this house. I pay for most of what's in here. And you treat me like I'm less than you." She rolled her eyes, arms crossed. "Oh, come on. You're overreacting. It's just a joke. You're too sensitive." I told her it didn't feel like a joke anymore. It felt like she was ashamed of me. And that's when she said the words that burned into my brain. "Maybe I am ashamed. All my friends' husbands have careers, not just jobs. They sit in offices, they wear suits. They don't come home looking like they crawled out of a factory. Why can't you do better? Why can't you be like them?" I just sat there, stunned. This was the same woman who once said she admired my work ethic, who bragged about how handy I was. Now, she was acting like I was some burden dragging her down. That was the first time I realized this wasn't just about jokes. It was a crack in a marriage, one that was only going to get wider. After that night, things didn't cool down, they heated up. It wasn't just her anymore. Her parents started joining in openly, as if they'd been waiting for the green light. We'd go over for Sunday dinner, and her dad would smirk across the table and say stuff like, "So, still playing with your little tools, huh? When are you going to grow up and get a real job?" Her mom would laugh and say, "Well, at least he can fix a leaky faucet, I guess." And my wife? She wouldn't defend me. She'd nod, sometimes even add her own jab. One time, I tried to push back, saying, "Actually, I make enough to keep us comfortable. The house we live in is mine, inherited fair and square, and I've never needed anyone to bail me out." Her mom snorted. "A house doesn't change what you are. You're still just what? A handyman." And my wife piled on, saying, "Don't get defensive. They're just pointing out what I already told you. You're capable of more, but you refuse to try." I remember leaving that dinner feeling like I'd just been ganged up on. 3 against 1. And the worst part wasn't even her parents. It was her. The woman who promised to be my partner was now my biggest critic. From that point on, every family gathering felt less like dinner and more like a firing squad. I stopped looking forward to them. I started wondering how long I could put up with being treated like an outsider in my own marriage. But as I'd soon find out, the worst was still coming. Things at home went downhill fast after that. It wasn't just the occasional jab anymore. It was daily. I'd sit down to watch TV after work, and she'd snap, "Don't put your dirty hands on the remote." If I walked through the kitchen in my work boots, even though I'd wipe them, she'd say, "Do you have to stomp around like some factory worker all the time?" The one that cut the deepest came one evening when I tried to talk to her about planning a weekend trip. Something simple, something just for us. She didn't even look up from her phone and said, "I don't want to be seen out there with you like that. You look like an employee who just escaped from work and is trying to blend in with the crowd. My friends' husbands, they look like men who belong in public." I swear, it was like getting punched in the gut. I asked her if she ever remembered the guy she married, the one she said she was proud of. She looked me right in the eye and said, "That was before I realized you'll never change. You'll always be stuck in that workshop of yours, covered in dust." Pathetic. That word. Pathetic. I didn't even know what to say. I just sat there, staring at the woman who once told me she loved me for being hard-working and humble. Now, she was acting like I was beneath her. And the crazy part? She wasn't done yet, because soon her words turned into actions. And that's when everything really blew up. One night, I came home from work like usual, tired but ready to put my feet up. I reached for the door with my key, and it didn't turn. I tried again. Same thing. At first, I thought maybe the lock was jammed. But then I rang the bell. My wife came to the door, arms crossed, a smug look on her face. "Oh, you're back," she said flatly. "What's going on?" I asked. "The key's not working." "That's because I had the locks changed," she said, just like she was talking about the weather. "I'm tired of you dragging your dirt into this house. I'll let you back in when you stop being pathetic and finally get a real job, like all the husbands of my friends." I stood there stunned. At first, I thought it had to be some twisted joke. But then I saw movement inside. Her parents were sitting in the living room, watching the whole thing like it was a show. Her dad even gave me this little shrug, like, "Well, that's what you get." She wasn't finished. "You think you're so proud, walking around like Mr. Hardworking. But this house isn't a workshop. It deserves someone better. Until then, you can stay outside. Maybe this will finally motivate you to change." I couldn't even process it. My own wife, standing in my doorway, acting like she owned the place. And my in-laws, cheering her on. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just turned around and walked away. My hands were shaking, my chest felt hollow, but my brain was already moving. I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't even know where I was walking. My feet just carried me until I ended up at my buddy Mark's place. He's been my friend since high school. The kind of guy who doesn't ask questions first, just opens the door and says, "What happened?" I sat down in his kitchen and told him everything. From the jokes, to the insults, to the sofa comments, all the way up to standing outside my own house while my wife and her parents looked at me like I was nothing. Mark just shook his head slowly and said, "Man, you don't deserve any of that. But you know what the funny part is? That house is yours, right?" That snapped me out of my fog. "Yeah," I said. "My grandparents left it to me. I had the deed before I even met her." That's when his whole face lit up. "Then she doesn't have a leg to stand on. You need to talk to a lawyer now." Mark had a buddy who was an attorney, so he made a call right then and there. Within an hour, I was sitting in front of a guy who looked over my paperwork and just smiled. Well, he said. "Looks like your wife and her family decided to play the wrong game. This house is 100% yours. She has no claim to it. In fact, if she changed the locks, she's trespassing in your property." The lawyer leaned back and tapped his pen. "We could go the straightforward route, file for divorce, Eviction notice, all nice and clean. Or he paused, smiling. We could make this unforgettable. Loud. The kind of lesson she and her family will never forget. For the first time that night, I felt something other than anger or hurt. I felt excited. I looked at him and said, "Tell me more." The lawyer leaned forward, lowering his voice like he was about to let me in on a secret. "Here's what we'll do," he said. "We'll start the divorce and eviction process quietly in the background. But while that's moving, we'll let her and her family get comfortable. Let them think they've won. Meanwhile, we'll gather every receipt, every paper trail, every record that proves you paid for the car, the furniture, the renovations, everything. When the time comes, we'll walk in with the sheriff and throw them out on the curb. Public, humiliating, and perfectly legal." I couldn't help but grin, though my chest was still tight. "You really think we can pull that off?" He chuckled. "Son, I've done this before. The law is on your side, and so is the deed. Right now, she thinks you're weak. We're going to use that against her." Mark slapped me on the back. "Man, this is going to be something to see. They have no idea what's coming." That night, we started gathering everything: titles, receipts, bank records. I had it all neatly kept. Turns out being just a laborer also meant I was disciplined. Every tool I bought, every piece of furniture I paid for, every improvement on the house, it was all documented. The more we piled up, the stronger I felt. For weeks, I had been walking around feeling like trash, like maybe she was right about me. But with every paper I handed to the lawyer, I realized something important. I built this life. Not her, not them, me. And soon enough, I was going to prove it loudly. While I was staying with Mark and quietly working with the lawyer, my wife and her parents were living it up in my house. I'd hear about it through mutual friends and neighbors. They said her parents were coming and going like they owned the place, her mom bragging about helping decorate, her dad lounging on the porch like a king. My wife even posted pictures online, smiling in the living room, captioning them with things like finally making this house feel like a real home. That one almost made me laugh out loud. A real home? On furniture I bought, under a roof my grandparents left me? Give me a break. The insults didn't stop, either. Word got back to me that she was telling her friends I was too pathetic to handle living in a nice house, and that I had run off to sulk like a little boy. Her parents chimed in too, acting like they'd saved her from a worthless marriage. But the more they mocked me, the calmer I became. Because I knew what they didn't. Every single day that passed was one day closer to the eviction notice, one day closer to the sheriff showing up at that front door. And the best part? They were digging themselves deeper without even knowing it. My lawyer told me to let them stay, let them use the place, let them brag. All it would do was make the fallout bigger. So I kept my head down, kept quiet, and waited. Because sometimes revenge isn't about striking fast. Sometimes it's about letting the other side believe they've already won, right up until the hammer drops. And when it dropped, oh boy, it was going to shake them to the core. The day finally came. My lawyer called me and said, "Everything's lined up. Sheriff's ready. You want this loud?" I didn't hesitate. Loud. We met early in the morning, paperwork in hand. My heart was pounding, but not with fear anymore, with anticipation. This was the day the tables turned. We pulled up to my house, sheriff's car right behind us. I'll never forget the look on my wife's face when she opened the door and saw me standing there with the lawyer. At first, she smirked like she was about to throw another insult. Then she spotted the uniformed deputy behind me, and her smile froze. "Mrs. Last name?" the sheriff asked. She nodded, confused. "You and your parents are hereby ordered to vacate these premises immediately. You are trespassing on property that legally belongs to your husband." Her jaw dropped. "What? That's ridiculous. This is our house." "No, it's not," my lawyer cut in smoothly, holding up the deed with my name on it. "This house was inherited by my client years before he ever met you. He allowed you to live here as his spouse, but you changed the locks illegally and denied him entry. That's criminal trespassing." Her parents came rushing into the hallway, demanding answers. Her dad puffed his chest out, yelling, "You can't just throw us out like this." The sheriff didn't even blink. "Sir, if you don't pack up and leave, I'll have to remove you myself. And trust me, you don't want that." The The scene was priceless. My wife turned red, sputtering excuses, while her mom wailed about how unfair this was. Neighbors started gathering outside, watching as the so-called perfect family was ordered to pack their things. And me? I just stood there, calm as ever, letting the paperwork and the law do all the talking. For the first time in months, I felt like I was standing tall again. But this wasn't just about eviction. I still had one more card to play. Once her family had started packing, my lawyer leaned in and said, "Ready for the next part?" I nodded. He turned to my wife and her parents, pulling out a thick folder. "Everything in this house, the car, the furniture, the renovations, even the electronics, were purchased by your husband. He has receipts for everything, down to the smallest detail. Legally, these items are his property. You have no claim to them." Her face went pale. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Her dad stammered, You can't just—" I interrupted quietly, holding up the car title. "This car? Paid for by me. Every payment. And every single piece of furniture? Also mine. Everything in this house is mine. You've been living here as my guests, nothing more." Her mom began to cry, her voice trembling. "But you thought wrong," I said firmly. "I welcomed you here out of kindness, not weakness. But kindness doesn't mean I lose my rights, my dignity, or my house." The shock in the room was palpable. They had spent months belittling me, mocking me, and treating me like a failure. And now the truth was staring them right in the face. The smug smiles, the insults, the little jokes, all gone, replaced by panic and shame. Even the neighbors who had gathered outside whispered among themselves, stunned at the complete reversal. For once, I felt the satisfaction of being seen for who I really was, not a laborer to be mocked, but a man who had quietly built everything around him. And I knew that this was just the beginning of my own reclaiming. By mid-afternoon, the reality had fully hit them. My wife's face was pale, her eyes wide as she clutched her phone, frantically texting someone, probably a friend or family lawyer. Her parents were shoving boxes into their car, mumbling excuses and threats under their breath. She looked at me, desperation spilling from every word. "Please, can we just talk? We can fix this. I'll change, I promise. I'll respect you. I held up my hand. "No, you had months to fix this, to stop mocking me, to treat me like an equal. You didn't. You chose to humiliate me. And now, you're facing the consequences." Her dad snapped, shaking his fist. "You'll regret this. You'll see. You're making a huge mistake." Her mom started crying uncontrollably, wailing, "We just wanted what was best for her." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The sheriff made it clear that packing was not optional. Every insult, every cruel word, every belittling joke over the past month had finally caught up to them. And in that moment, I realized something important. Revenge wasn't about making them suffer endlessly. It was about reclaiming my life, showing them I wouldn't be walked over, and letting justice speak louder than anger ever could. By the time they left, the house was quiet again. My things were intact. My car was in the driveway, and I felt free. The house felt different once they were gone. Quiet. Mine. Not just in a legal sense, but in a way that let me breathe again. I walked through each room, touching the furniture I had bought, looking at the walls I had painted, and realized how much of my life I had invested here. Not just money, but care, time, and patience. For the first time in months, I felt proud of myself. Not for the revenge, but for standing my ground. I didn't feel anger bubbling up, or the need to justify myself to anyone. The weight of their judgment had been lifted. I sat on the sofa, the same one she once told me I couldn't touch, and I laughed quietly to myself. It wasn't a mean laugh. It was a laugh of relief, of release. I had been humiliated, doubted, and ridiculed, but I had never lost my sense of who I was. And now, the people who tried to make me feel small were gone, and my life could finally continue on my terms. I realized something else too. Revenge had been satisfying, yes, but the real victory was reclaiming my dignity and showing myself that I didn't need anyone's approval to be proud of my life. Word spread quickly about what had happened. Neighbors whispered in the streets, friends called to check on me, and even some distant relatives sent messages, shocked at how everything had turned out. A few neighbors admitted later that they had always noticed how my wife and her family treated me, but didn't say anything. "We didn't think it would go this far," one of them said. "But honestly, you handled it like a boss." Friends were supportive, some even joking. "You finally gave them the eviction of a lifetime." The praise felt strange at first, but also deeply satisfying. People who had only seen one side of the story were now seeing the truth, and the respect I had always deserved was finally coming through. Even more unexpectedly, some of her former friends, the ones she used to brag to about her perfect husband, reached out privately. They apologized for believing her version of events and admitted they never truly understood how hard I had worked or how kind I had been. It was surreal. The quiet victory of reclaiming my home had not only restored my life, but also forced the truth into the open. For the first time, I felt completely in control, unshaken by the opinions of those who had once mocked me. And yet, a part of me knew this story wasn't just about the house. It was about standing up for myself, for dignity, and for anyone who's ever been underestimated or belittled. Sitting alone in my living room that evening, I reflected on everything that had happened. The months of insults, the endless mocking, the moment I was locked out of my own home. It all felt surreal now. But the important part wasn't the revenge itself. It was what I learned along the way. I learned that self-worth isn't measured by what others think of you, or by the kind of job you have, the clothes you wear, or the dust on your hands. I learned that kindness doesn't mean weakness, and patience doesn't mean you have to accept humiliation. And most importantly, I learned that standing up for yourself isn't just about retaliation. It's about reclaiming your life and your dignity. I would advise anyone in a similar situation: keep your records, know your rights, and never let anyone make you feel small for being who you are. And if someone crosses the line, don't be afraid to act calmly, legally, and strategically. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't cruelty, it's justice delivered with precision. That house, my home, felt warmer that night than it ever had. Not because of the walls or the furniture, but because I knew that I had taken back what was mine, and I had done it on my own terms. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free.